On a cool, damp morning in the late 1870s, in the garden of a large country home in southern England, the buzz of insects and chorus of birdsong was rudely interrupted by the sound of an old man yelling. The man was Charles Darwin, now nearly 70 years old, and the thing he was yelling at was a worm. Now, Darwin had nothing against this particular worm. This was not a cry of rage or distress at the earthworm's appearance in his garden after a night of rain. It was a deeply scientific scream. This was one of Darwin's many strange but meticulous experiments that he conducted at his home in his later years. See, after having solved the small matter of evolution by natural selection, becoming one of the most famous scientists in the world in the process, Darwin focused his big old brain on a different personal obsession. One that would be the final scientific side quest of his long and storied life. This was Darwin's worm era, culminating in his worm book, the last book he'd ever published, just 6 months before his death. But while it was his last, it was far from his least. Darwin's worm book was a runaway hit, winning rave reviews and stimulating the development of a whole new field of science. For good reason too, because as Darwin argued, these often overlooked creatures are among the most important animals in the entire history of the planet. And in the century and a half since, the fossil record has revealed that he was more correct than he could ever have even imagined. Because during one of the single most pivotal chapters of deep time that revolutionized life on Earth, when we go digging for who or what we have to think, there we find worms, right under our toes the entire time. If there's one thing you should probably know about the kind of guy that Darwin was, it's that, at heart, he was simply a relentlessly curious nerd. His major contributions to science didn't stem from some raw brilliance or unparalleled genius that only he possessed. Instead, his gifts were the luxury of being able to spend as much time as he liked studying whatever caught his attention, combined with the dogged persistence to follow each side quest through to the end. From finches and pigeons to orchids and carnivorous plants, not to mention the 8 years he spent studying barnacles, even though they nearly broke him mentally, it was Darwin's ability to see beauty and wonder in species that others overlooked, and to learn profound lessons from them that allowed him to notice things about the natural world that no one else ever had. But while all those other quests came and went, Darwin spent more than 40 years, over half his life, with worms on the brain. They first caught his attention in 1837 when he was in his late 20s, just 1 year after returning from his fateful voyage around the world on the HMS Beagle. His uncle showed him some fields that 15 years earlier had been covered in various waste materials that now were buried below the surface, probably, as his uncle suspected, by the work of earthworms. To most people, this would have seemed like a pretty unimportant throwaway observation. But to Darwin, the idea that such small creatures could cause such big changes over time ignited a fascination with wormkind that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Now, in the decades that followed, he got sidetracked with other things, figuring out how species originate, how life evolves over time, how humanity came to be, minor stuff like that. But he never forgot worms, and in the final decade of his life, he turned his laser-like focus on them once more, determined to finally write about earthworms before joining them, as he put it. He conducted a range of experiments to test how they perceived their environment, like offering them different kinds of food and exposing them to sources of light and heat. He'd also yell at them real loud, as we mentioned earlier, and he even got his son to play a bassoon at them just to see how they'd react to the noise. But the primary aspect of earthworms that Darwin tried to figure out was the very same one that had first captivated him in 1837, the question of how they gradually engineered the ecosystems that they lived in. See, Darwin recognized that as worms plow through the earth, they stimulate a number of changes, like recycling organic matter and contributing to the formation of soil. This process of reworking the ground would later become known as bioturbation. And by measuring the rate at which worms carried out this process day after day, year after year, Darwin was able to glimpse the possible big picture implications. Such observations led Darwin to become the first person to really grasp that the behavior of these small, unsung animals must inevitably have dramatic, planetary scale effects, especially over long timescales. As he put it in his worm book, it may be doubted whether there are many other animals which have played so important a part in the history of the world as these lowly, organized creatures. The only problem was that during Darwin's time, there just wasn't enough fossil evidence available for him to really point to what that important part might have actually looked like. Today, though, we have the fossil evidence that Darwin lacked, and it shows that his quite literally groundbreaking ideas were right. This really is a worm's world. The rest of us are just living in it. And if it wasn't for their bioturbation of the ancient Earth, we might never have evolved at all. Let me explain. One of the most consequential chapters in the entire history of life was the Cambrian period, between around 539 and 487 million years ago. Perhaps you've heard of it and the so-called Cambrian explosion that happened in it. The spread of complex animal species that were some of the first to be, well, recognizable as animals. They replaced the generally much weirder life forms that preceded them in the Ediacaran period, which we often struggle to even place on the tree of life. Those older Ediacaran species were simpler, squishier, and mostly immobile, anchored to the hard and solid seafloor. And this evolutionary transition from strange Ediacaran life to familiar Cambrian life has been one of the most mysterious and hotly debated topics in natural history. What changed after billions of years that led to the relatively sudden rise and spread of complex animal life as we know it? Well, while many ideas have been proposed over decades, in recent years, some scientists have argued that a large part of the credit should go to, you guessed it, ancient worms digging through the sediment. See, around the tail end of the Ediacaran, right before the Cambrian began, the earliest worm-like animals appear in the fossil record. And they appeared in such diversity and abundance that this slice of the Ediacaran is often known simply as Worm World. The fossilized burrows these ancient worms left behind show that they were the first life forms routinely digging into and burrowing through the sea floor, the very first bioturbators that the world ever saw. And just like their earthworm equivalents today, the ancient species of worm world had a massive impact on their ecosystem as the late Ediacaran transitioned into the early Cambrian. By churning up the seafloor for the first time, they opened up a whole new ecological dimension, altering geochemical cycles, changing the nutrient availability in the water, and generally making the previously hard seafloor much softer. This softer, looser, and increasingly multifaceted new seafloor, which had been created by the evolution of bioturbating worms, was a catastrophic environmental shift for Ediacaran species that were adapted for anchoring themselves to solid surfaces. A shift that may have contributed to their decline, while helping set the stage for the Cambrian explosion of much more familiar animal groups. The new ecological niches and resources opened up by those ancient worms plowing their way through the seafloor would have been a massive opportunity for the more complex Cambrian species. These more mobile species were well positioned to take advantage of this increasingly dynamic world. And the legacy of their rise in the aftermath of Worm World continues to this day in the form of you, me, and all other animal life. We are the direct descendants of those early Cambrian lineages that got their start over 500 million years ago. Darwin had no way of knowing any of this, of course, or that his backyard experiments and observations on bioturbation by worms were basically replicating one of the single most pivotal environmental changes in the entire history of life on Earth. And while he did have a hunch that worms had been far more important over the course of natural history than anyone else assumed, he was wrecked by self-doubt and insecurity about his work. Classic Darwin. Instead of chasing scientific fame or validation at this late stage of life, he was simply trying to scratch his humble worm itch that had lasted over 40 years. And he was convinced that no one would really pay any attention to what he described as his curious little book of small importance. He even referred to the entire topic of bioturbation as a subject I have perhaps treated in foolish detail. But the world disagreed. Darwin's worm book was a spectacular success, selling more copies in its first year than On the Origin of Species had, despite that book tackling one of the most profound questions humanity had ever asked, and this one addressing, well, what the deal was with worms. It also won critical acclaim across the world, with one reviewer saying, Darwin confers upon the despised and humble earthworm an interest it never possessed before. Portions of his book read almost like a romance, for there is much in his revelations of surprising strangeness and novelty. Less than 6 months after publishing his worm book and finally completing his last and longest-lasting side quest that had occupied his mind for more than half his life, Darwin died at age 73. To honor his life and work, he was buried beneath Westminster Abbey in the heart of London, a spot reserved for only the most renowned of scientists, where he lies to this day alongside such names as Isaac Newton and Stephen Hawking. It was his capacity for recognizing the big impact of even the smallest of factors, be it tiny creatures or minuscule change over time, that landed him among the greats. And so, instead of fulfilling his prediction and eventually joining the earthworms that he had obsessed over, Darwin's own hole in the ground turned out to be much, much more special. So fossil evidence suggests that a parent 260 million years ago stayed behind to protect their young in a burrow. And the parent that stayed behind, it might have been the male. Find out more in our episode, Is This the Oldest Dad in the Fossil Record? And thanks to this month's eontologists who have wormed their way into our hearts.
Addie, Annie and Eric Higgins, Carl Wolfel, Jackie Scott Ralston, Jake Hart, John Davidson Ing, Juan M., Melanie Lamb Carnevale, Nico Robin, Raphael Hassa, and Steve.
By becoming an Eonite at patreon.com/eons, you can get fun perks like access to behind-the-scenes content, including clips from Eons shoots. And as always, thank you for joining me in the Ken Barnes studio. Subscribe at youtube.com/eons for more epic epochs. Okay, I'm gonna do this one more time in my best Victorian man voice. I hate the barnacle as no man ever did before. Nope. It's so bad, especially not with Farhan on the call. Nope. No, Victorian scientist, English scientist for me today. No. I don't want him to call HR.